The rain fell hard that night, drumming against a leaking roof as a young woman knelt in the dark, clutching her thin wrapper to her chest. Hunger twisted her stomach, shame burned her skin, and tears slid silently down her face. She had been called daughter all her life until one whispered sentence destroyed everything. "You're not my real child." By morning, she was no longer family. No farewell, no wedding, no mercy. They pushed her out like trash and forced her into the arms of a poor, limping fisherman the whole village mocked. People laughed as she followed him to a broken hut by the river, believing her life was finished. What none of them knew was that the man they used to punish her was hiding a secret powerful enough to shake their world. Before the story continues, tell me where you're watching from and your local time right now. I love reading your comments. And if stories of injustice, hidden truths, and unexpected hope speak to your heart, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. The wind howled through the trees that night, shaking the walls of a small mud hut on the edge of the village. Inside, a single oil lamp flickered, casting long shadows over the lifeless body of a young woman lying on the dirt floor. Her chest no longer rose. Her eyes stared into nothing. Childbirth had taken her life, leaving behind only silence and a baby's desperate cry. The old midwife knelt beside the newborn girl, her wrinkled hands trembling as she wrapped the tiny body in a torn piece of cloth. The baby's cry was sharp and piercing, cutting through the storm outside like a cry for mercy. The midwife swallowed hard, her heart heavy. "This child has no one," she murmured, looking from the baby to the dead mother. "No father, no family, just fate." She stood slowly, glancing toward the door. In this village, abandoned children rarely survived. Hunger, sickness, and cruelty swallowed them whole. The midwife took one step toward the door, her mind already preparing to leave the baby to destiny. That was when a shadow appeared in the doorway. The midwife froze. A woman stood there, tall and firm despite her worn wrapper and tired eyes. Her name was Mama Ngozi, a woman known throughout the village for her sharp tongue and strict ways. She was not rich, but she was respected. People feared her disapproval. She already had a daughter at home, her pride, her blood. Mama Ngozi's gaze fell on the crying baby. "Give me the child," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried authority. The midwife blinked in surprise. "Mama Ngozi, are you sure?" she asked carefully. "You already have a daughter. Another mouth to feed is not a small thing." Mama Ngozi did not hesitate. "I said, give me the child." The midwife searched her face, trying to understand what had stirred this sudden decision. Pity, compassion, or something else entirely. But Mama Ngozi's expression revealed nothing. Slowly, the midwife handed the baby over. The moment Mama Ngozi took the child into her arms, the baby's cries softened. Tiny fingers curled around the woman's thumb, clinging as if she knew this stranger was her only chance at life. Mama Ngozi looked down at the infant for a long moment. "She will be called Zainab," she said finally. The name fell into the air like a quiet promise. Mama Ngozi turned and walked back into the storm, carrying the baby against her chest. She had no idea, none at all, that this small decision would one day become the greatest regret of her life. Zainab grew up believing Mama Ngozi was her real mother. There were no stories of adoption, no whispered truths, only the life she knew. A small house, early mornings, endless chores, and a mother whose love felt conditional. From the time Zainab could walk, she worked. She swept the compound before sunrise. She fetched water while the sky was still gray. She cooked, washed clothes, cleaned pots, and ran errands through the dusty village paths. Meanwhile, Mama Ngozi's real daughter, Sade, played with other children, laughed loudly, and returned home only when hunger called her back. Whenever Zainab grew tired or asked for rest, Mama Ngozi's response was sharp. "Are your hands broken? Do you think food cooks itself? Work harder. I didn't bring you here to be lazy. Zainab obeyed. She always obeyed. She believed that if she worked harder, smiled more, tried better, she would finally earn the love she longed for. At night, when everyone slept, Zainab would curl up on her thin mat and whisper silent prayers. God, please let Mama love me tomorrow. As the years passed, something began to change. Zainab grew into a young woman of striking beauty. Her skin was smooth and deep brown, glowing softly under the sun. Her eyes were wide and expressive, filled with quiet strength. Her hair grew thick and long, framing her face in a way that made people pause when she passed. The village noticed. Whispers followed her footsteps. She's too beautiful to be Mama Ngozi's daughter. Look at her. She doesn't resemble anyone in that house. Where did that girl really come from? Said noticed too. Once Saad had been the one people admired, the one boys smiled at, the one elders praised. But slowly, without Zainab ever trying, attention shifted. Village boys lingered longer when Zainab passed. Compliments meant for Saad somehow landed on Zainab instead. Even Kwame, the wealthy trader's son Saad secretly admired, could not hide the way his eyes followed Zainab. Jealousy took root in Saad's heart like poison. She watched Zainab scrub floors until her fingers ached. She saw her serve food last, eat least, and sleep exhausted. And still, people admired her. Said's smiles became forced, her laughter sharp. At night, she whispered into her mother's ear, "Have you noticed people don't see me anymore? They only talk about her." Mama Ngozi listened. At first she brushed it off, but doubt crept in like a slow disease. She began to look at Zainab differently, not as a child she raised, but as a threat. The night everything changed came quietly. Zainab had just finished washing clothes by the fire. Her arms were sore, her back stiff. As she carried the basket inside, she heard voices from the kitchen. Mama Ngozi, Sade. Their tones were low, secretive. Zainab stopped. She hadn't meant to listen, but her feet refused to move. "She's not even your real daughter," Said whispered bitterly. Zainab's breath caught. What? Mama Ngozi replied, uneasy. "She's adopted, isn't she?" Said continued. "That's why she's so different. That's why she doesn't belong here. You know it." The world tilted. Zainab's hands began to shake. Mama Ngozi sighed heavily. A sound filled with years of buried truth. "You're right," she said. "She was never mine." Zainab felt her heart shatter. "I should have left her that night," Mama Ngozi added coldly. The basket slipped from Zainab's fingers and hit the ground with a dull thud. She pressed her hand to her chest, struggling to breathe. Everything she believed, every memory, every sacrifice, every hope collapsed in that moment. She wasn't unwanted because she failed. She was unwanted because she never belonged. From that night on, Mama Ngozi and Sade no longer hid their cruelty. Zainab was no longer treated like a daughter. She was treated like a servant. And the path toward her greatest suffering had finally begun. After the truth spilled from Mama Ngozi's lips that night, something inside the house died. It was not announced. No ceremony marked it. But Zainab felt it in the air. The next morning the silence was colder, the looks sharper, the words fewer and crueler. The small space she once called home no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a place she was merely tolerated. For now. Mama Ngozi no longer pretended. She spoke to Zainab only when issuing commands. "Fetch water. Wash the pots again. Why are you still standing there?" There was no warmth in her voice, no patience, no affection. And Saad became unbearable. She watched Zainab with narrowed eyes, studying her as if she were an enemy who had infiltrated their lives. Every compliment Zainab received from outsiders felt like an insult to Saad. Every whispered admiration twisted deeper into resentment. Zainab noticed it all, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was safer. The village, however, had no such restraint. As Zainab walked through the dusty paths carrying baskets on her head, people stared openly now. Women nudged each other. Men paused mid-conversation. Children whispered her name like it carried mystery. "She's grown too beautiful for this place," someone murmured one afternoon. "Beauty like that doesn't come from Mama Ngozi," another replied. "I swear that girl looks like she fell from the sky." Zainab heard the whispers, but she kept her eyes on the ground. She did not know that every word cut Said like a blade. Said, who wore her best wrappers and decorated her hair with beads, noticed how attention slipped through her fingers no matter how hard she tried to reclaim it. She laughed louder, she walked straighter, she smiled wider. Still eyes followed Zainab. Even Kwame, the wealthy trader's son, the one Saad had dreamed of marrying, lingered too long when Zainab passed. His greetings grew warmer, his smiles softer. Saad saw it all, and hatred bloomed fully in her heart. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with fire, Sade stood beside her mother outside their home. "Do you know what they say about her?" Sade asked casually. Mama Ngozi did not look up from the cassava she was peeling. "Who that girl?" Sade replied. "Zainab." Mama Ngozi's hands paused. "They say she's more beautiful than any girl in the village." Sade continued, her voice sweet with poison. "They say she doesn't belong here. They say you're hiding something." Mama Ngozi frowned. "People talk too much." "But what if they're right?" Sade pressed. "What if she really doesn't belong? What if she grows and takes everything meant for me?" Mama Ngozi looked toward the hut where Zainab was washing plates. For the first time, she didn't see a child she raised. She saw a problem. From that day on, Zainab's workload doubled. She woke before the rooster crowed and slept long after the fire died. She ate after everyone else if there was anything left. Her hands grew rough. Her shoulders ached constantly. Still, she did not complain. But something inside her began to change. The girl who once bent her head in shame began to straighten her back. Not in defiance, but in quiet endurance. Pain had shaped her into something stronger than Mama Ngozi realized. That strength unsettled Said even more. "You think you're special now," Said sneered one afternoon, blocking Zainab's path. "Do you think beauty will save you?" Zainab said nothing. Said stepped closer. "You are nothing but an abandoned child." Zainab looked up slowly. Her eyes did not flash with anger. They held something far worse: acceptance. Said recoiled. The breaking point came without warning. One night, as Zainab scrubbed the floor near the kitchen, she heard Mama Ngozi speaking sharply. "I've decided," Mama Ngozi said. Sade leaned in eagerly. "About what?" "That girl," Mama Ngozi replied. "She has overstayed her welcome." Zainab's heart skipped. "She's a burden," Mama Ngozi continued. "People are starting to talk, and I won't let her bring shame into this house." Zainab pressed her palm against the floor to steady herself. "What will you do?" Sade asked. Mama Ngozi's voice hardened. "I will marry her off." Zainab froze. "Married to who? Anyone?" Mama Ngozi said dismissively. "As long as she leaves." Said smiled. The next morning, Mama Ngozi called Zainab outside. Zainab stood quietly, her hands folded, waiting. "You are getting married," Mama Ngozi said flatly. Zainab's breath caught. "Married?" "Yes." "To who, Mama?" The word slipped out before she could stop herself. Mama Ngozi's eyes hardened. "Do not call me that." Zainab flinched. "You will marry Chinedu," Mama Ngozi continued. The name struck fear into Zainab's heart. Everyone in the village knew Chinedu, the poor fisherman who lived alone by the river, the man who walked with a limp, the man people laughed at, pitied, and ignored. Tears welled in Zainab's eyes. "Please," she whispered, I will do better. I will work harder. Mama Ngozi grabbed her arm painfully. I should have thrown you away years ago, she hissed. You are nothing to me. Zainab felt something inside her break beyond repair. You will marry him, Mama Ngozi finished. And you will leave this house. Forever. Said watched from the doorway, smiling. The wedding was no wedding at all. No music, no food, no celebration. Just a quiet exchange like passing an unwanted item from one hand to another. Zainab walked behind Chinedu as they left the compound. She did not look back. Behind her, laughter followed. Ahead of her, uncertainty. As they reached the edge of the village, Zainab stared at the small hut by the river, the place that would now be her home. Her heart sank. She believed her life was over. She did not know this was only the beginning. Zainab followed Chinedu in silence as they walked away from Mama Ngozi's compound. Her feet felt heavy, as though the earth itself was trying to hold her back. Each step stirred dust and memories, years of sweeping that same ground, praying in that same space, hoping to be seen as more than a burden. No one came to say goodbye. Not a single blessing followed her footsteps. From the doorway, Sade watched with folded arms, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. To her, this was victory. Zainab was no longer competition. She was being erased. Mama Ngozi did not even turn her head. To her, Zainab had already ceased to exist. The hut by the river came into view as the sun climbed higher in the sky. It was smaller than Zainab had imagined. Its mud walls cracked, its roof sagging unevenly. One corner drooped so badly that sunlight slipped through the holes where rain surely poured in at night. This was where Chinedu lived. This was where Zainab would now belong. She stopped walking. Chinedu noticed and turned back, his expression unreadable. His limp was more obvious up close, his steps uneven, practiced like a man long accustomed to pain. This is it, he said quietly. Zainab stared at the hut, her throat tightening. She had known life would be hard, but seeing it with her own eyes was different. The place smelled faintly of damp wood and old fish. A single wooden stool sat outside. No fence, no garden, no sign of comfort. Her heart sank. Come, Chinedu said gently, stepping aside so she could enter first. She hesitated. Then she stepped inside. The hut was bare. A creaking wooden bed stood against one wall. A small mat lay rolled in the corner. A clay pot, a few utensils, and an old knife rested near the fire pit. That was all. Zainab felt tears press against her eyes, but she forced them back. She would not cry again, not here, not for anyone. This is your home now, Chinedu said, his voice calm but firm. Zainab nodded slowly, though her chest felt hollow. Home. The word tasted strange on her tongue. She had lost one home that morning, and now she was expected to call this place hers. Chinedu watched her closely. He did not miss the fear in her eyes or the way her shoulders tensed as if she were bracing for a blow. But he said nothing. Instead, he unrolled the mat and placed it on the floor. You can sleep here, he said, pointing to it. Zainab looked at him in surprise. She had expected worse. She had feared he would demand his rights as a husband immediately, that he would treat her like something he had bought. But he didn't. Chinedu lay down on the wooden bed and turned his back to her. The message was clear. That night the wind howled through the cracks in the walls, whistling like a morning song. Zainab curled up on the mat, pulling her thin wrapper tightly around her body. Tears finally came. They fell silently, soaking into the mat beneath her cheek. Her thoughts raced. She remembered Mama Ngozi's words. I should have left you. She remembered Sade's smile. She remembered the laughter as she walked away. Was this her punishment for being born? She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to quiet the ache. God, she whispered into the darkness, is this all my life will ever be? No answer came. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her into a restless sleep. Morning arrived with noise, laughter, whispers, mockery. Zainab woke to the sound of voices outside the hut. As she stepped out, she saw village women gathered near the river, pretending to fetch water while stealing glances at her. "So this is her now," one woman said loudly. "The rich woman's daughter married to a beggar," another added, bursting into laughter. "Does he even have food to give her?" Zainab lowered her head. She had endured mockery before, but this felt sharper, deeper, more public. As she reached for a bucket, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Well, well. Look at you." Zainab stiffened. Said. Her stepsister stood nearby, draped in fine wrappers, her skin glowing with expensive oils. Gold bracelets jingled on her wrists as she approached. Sister Said said sweetly. "How is married life?" Zainab said nothing. Said leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You should be grateful," she whispered. "At least someone wanted you. No man of status would ever marry an abandoned child like you." The words burned. Zainab clenched her fists but refused to cry. Without another word, she lifted the bucket and walked away. Behind her, laughter erupted again. She spent the rest of the day by the river washing clothes and staring at her reflection in the water. The girl staring back looked tired, older, worn down by a life that never seemed to give her rest. "Maybe they're right," she murmured. "Maybe I really am nothing." But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered back, "Not yet." Days passed. Zainab learned to live beside Chinedu, though they spoke little. She cleaned the hut, fetched water, cooked simple meals when there was food, and tried to make herself small. Life was hard, but strangely it was still easier than living under Mama Ngozi's roof. No one shouted at her here. No one reminded her she didn't belong. One afternoon, while returning from the market, Zainab struggled to carry a heavy basket of yams. Her arms shook, her vision blurred. Suddenly she tripped. The yams scattered across the dusty ground. Laughter erupted. "She's useless even as a poor man's wife," someone sneered. Zainab's face burned with shame as she bent down to gather the yams. Then a hand reached down beside hers. She looked up in shock. Chinedu. Without a word, he picked up the yams and handed her the basket. His expression was calm, no mockery, no annoyance. "You don't have to carry everything alone," he said softly. Something shifted inside Zainab. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her like that. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Zainab sat outside the hut watching the sky turn gold. Her stomach growled loudly. Chinedu heard it. He stood, disappeared inside, and returned with a small wooden bowl. "Eat," he said, placing it beside her. Zainab stared at the food-boiled yam with palm oil. Simple, small, but to her starving body it was everything. "What about you?" she asked hesitantly. "I already ate," Chinedu replied. But Zainab noticed something. There was no second bowl. Her chest tightened as she realized the truth. He had given her the only food in the house. She ate slowly, each bite filling not just her stomach, but a place inside her heart she thought had been empty forever. For the first time since she was forced into marriage, Zainab did not feel completely alone. And though she did not know it yet, the man she had been sent to suffer with was quietly changing her destiny, one act of kindness at a time. The hunger and exhaustion finally caught up with Zainab. For days she had pushed herself beyond her limits, fetching water under the harsh sun, cleaning the hut, and walking long distances to the market with barely enough strength to stand. Her body had grown thin, her steps slower, but she refused to complain. Complaining had never changed anything in her life. That morning, as she lifted the water bucket from the river, a sudden dizziness washed over her. The world tilted. The bucket slipped from her hands, splashing water onto the dirt. Zainab tried to steady herself, but her legs betrayed her. The sky spun. Then everything went black. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was warmth. A cool cloth rested on her forehead, soothing the fire burning beneath her skin. The faint crackle of a small fire reached her ears. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy, weak, as though all her strength had been drained away. She turned her head slowly. Chinedu sat beside the wooden bed, his brows drawn together in worry. In his hands was a clay bowl, steam rising gently from it. "You fainted," he said quietly. "Don't try to sit up." Zainab blinked in confusion. I'm sorry," she whispered, attempting to move. "Don't," Chinedu said, firmer now. "You're burning with fever." No one had ever said those words to her before. No one had ever cared enough to notice. He dipped a spoon into the bowl and brought it to her lips. "Drink." Zainab hesitated, unused to being helped. Then she swallowed the warm herbal mixture. The liquid slid down her throat, easing the ache in her chest. Chinedu stayed beside her all day. He changed the cloth on her forehead. He kept the fire alive. He watched her breathe as though afraid she might disappear if he looked away. Even in her feverish haze, Zainab wondered why. Why would a man the whole village mocked show her such kindness? That night she drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by fragments of her past. Mamangozi's cold eyes, Said's laughter, the feeling of being unwanted. Each time she stirred, Chinedu was there, steady and quiet. By morning, her fever had broken. She opened her eyes to find him sitting on the stool, sharpening his old knife, his movements slow and careful. "You should rest today," he said without looking up. Zainab nodded weakly. Her throat felt tight. "Thank you." He paused for a moment, then nodded once and returned to his work. The silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt safe. Zainab was still recovering when an unexpected visitor arrived. She heard footsteps outside the hut, followed by a sharp, familiar laugh. Her heart clenched before she even saw her. Said stepped inside, her nose wrinkling in disgust. "Oh, Zainab," she said, looking around dramatically. "Is this really where you live?" She laughed loudly. "I knew it was bad, but this..." She shook her head. "Even goats live better than this." Zainab gripped the edge of the bed, her fingers trembling. She refused to cry. She had cried enough tears for one lifetime. Said placed a basket on the floor and opened it, revealing fresh vegetables, dried fish, and warm bread. The smell alone made Zainab's stomach twist painfully. "Mother sent food," Saad said sweetly. Hope flickered in Zainab's chest. Then Said smirked and pulled the basket away. "Oh, I forgot," she said. "This food isn't for you. It's for me." She picked up a piece of bread and took a slow, exaggerated bite, watching Zainab closely. "I just wanted you to see what you're missing." Humiliation burned deep in Zainab's chest. She lowered her gaze, swallowing hard. That was when footsteps sounded behind them. Chinedu entered the hut. He took in the scene in a single glance, the basket, the bread in Sade's hand, the look on Zainab's face. "Leave," he said calmly. Sade raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me, you heard me?" Chinedu replied, his voice steady. "Take your food and leave." Sade laughed. "Do you know who I am?" Chinedu stepped closer. "I know exactly who you are," he said quietly. "A woman who finds joy in another person's suffering, but not here, not in my home." Something in his voice made Sad pause. For the first time, she truly looked at him. There was a calm authority in his posture, a strength that did not match the image the village had painted of him. The poor, limping fisherman suddenly did not seem so weak. Sade scoffed, but she grabbed her basket and stormed out without another word. Zainab stared at Chinedu, stunned. No one had ever defended her before. "Who are you?" she whispered. Chinedu smiled faintly, but his eyes held secrets. "Just a man," he replied. After that day, Zainab could no longer ignore the questions forming in her heart. Chinedu was unlike anyone she had ever known. He barely spoke, yet his actions spoke volumes. He never raised his voice, never complained, never treated her like a burden. Instead, he protected her in quiet ways, standing between her and cruelty, offering what little he had without hesitation. One evening, he left the hut for several hours without explanation. Zainab sat alone, her thoughts spiraling. Had she done something wrong? Night fell, and just as she was preparing to sleep, Chinedu returned carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Open it," he said, placing it beside her mat. Inside were warm bread, roasted fish, and a small flask of fresh palm wine. Zainab gasped. "Where did you get this?" "You haven't eaten properly in days," he replied simply. Tears filled her eyes. Before eating, she looked at him. "Did you eat?" He smirked slightly. "I'm not the one who fainted." Zainab broke the bread in half and held one piece out to him. "Please," she whispered. "Eat with me." For a long moment he hesitated, then he sat beside her. They ate together in silence, not the painful silence of strangers, but the gentle silence of two people beginning to understand each other. That night the cold wind returned, slipping through the cracks in the hut. Zainab shivered on her mat. Without a word, Chinedu rose from the bed and draped a thick cloth over her shoulders. She clutched at warmth, spreading through her body and her heart. She had spent years believing she was unloved, but now in this broken hut by the river, she felt something she had never known before. Safety. And somewhere deep inside, hope quietly took root. Zainab slept deeply that night, wrapped in the thick cloth Chinedu had placed over her shoulders. For the first time in years, her dreams were not filled with running, crying, or being chased away. Instead, she dreamed of warmth, of sitting beside a quiet fire, of hands that did not strike or shove but protected. Morning came gently. The sun rose over the river, its light slipping through the cracks in the hut. Zainab stirred and opened her eyes slowly. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she remembered. The hut. The river. Chinedu. She sat up, surprised by how much stronger she felt. Her fever was gone. The ache in her bones had eased. Outside, she heard the familiar sound of a knife scraping softly against wood. Chinedu was awake. She stepped out of the hut and found him sitting on a low stool, sharpening his knife as usual. He glanced up when he saw her. "You're better," he said. Zainab nodded. "I feel stronger. Thank you for last night." He shrugged slightly. "You needed rest." There was something about the way he said it, simple, certain, that made her chest tighten. No one had ever spoken about her needs as if they mattered. Later that morning, Zainab took her buckets and headed toward the river to fetch water. As she walked through the narrow paths, she noticed people watching her more closely than before. Their whispers followed her. "Did you hear?" one woman murmured to another. "That poor fisherman bought expensive food yesterday. I saw it with my own eyes, fresh bread, palm wine. How can he afford that?" Zainab's heart began to pound. She kept walking, but the voices grew louder. "He must have stolen it. There's no way a man like him can afford such things. Something about that man is not right." By the time she reached the river, her hands were shaking. She knelt down to fill her bucket, staring at her reflection in the water. The woman looking back at her no longer looked as broken as before, but fear clouded her eyes. The village had always mocked Chinedu, now they were suspicious. And suspicion in this place was dangerous. When she returned home, she found Chinedu sitting outside mending an old fishing net. His face was calm, unreadable, as though the world's noise could not touch him. "Chinedu," she said, unable to hide the worry in her voice. He looked up. "People are talking," she continued. "They say you bought expensive food. They think you stole it." A faint smile touched his lips. "Let them talk. It does matter, Zainab insisted, stepping closer. If they believed that they could come for you, they could hurt you. Chinedu studied her for a long moment. His gaze was deep, thoughtful, almost sad. Does it change who I am? He asked quietly. Zainab hesitated. No. But then let them think what they want, he said. I know who I am. His calm unsettled her. She had grown up watching people defend themselves loudly, desperately. Chinedu did neither. It was as if he stood on ground firmer than the rest of the village. Chinedu, she asked softly, who are you? He did not answer right away. Instead, he returned to his net. A man who doesn't want to see his wife suffer, he said at last. Her heart skipped. Wife? He had never used that word before. As days passed, Zainab became more aware of the small things that did not add up. The way Chinedu carried himself straight-backed, steady even with his limp. The way people fell silent when he spoke firmly. The way he seemed completely unafraid of the village's judgment. One afternoon, as she peeled cassava outside the hut, she watched him sit quietly by the doorway, staring into the distance. The sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting lines of old pain and deep thought. Chinedu? She said hesitantly. He turned to her. Why do you live like this? She asked. You could have married someone else, someone with less trouble. His jaw tightened slightly. You think you're trouble? He asked. Zainab swallowed. I was thrown away. Given to you like something unwanted. He stood up slowly and faced her fully. His eyes held something fierce and gentle at the same time. You are not unwanted, he said. Her breath caught. For years, he continued, I lived believing I was worthless too. Zainab frowned. What do you mean? Chinedu looked away, his gaze drifting toward the river. I was not always like this, he said quietly. There was a time when I had everything. She stared at him. A father, he continued. Wealth, servants, respect. He laughed softly without humor. Then I was injured. I could no longer walk properly. Zainab's heart twisted. My father was ashamed of me, Chinedu went on. He sent me away. Said a broken son had no place beside him. Tears stung Zainab's eyes. I learned something then, he said. Poverty does not make a person less worthy. But the world will treat you as if it does. She reached out without thinking and placed her hand over his. You are not worthless, she whispered. For a moment, Chinedu looked surprised. Then his fingers closed gently around hers. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Zainab woke to laughter. She blinked confused, then stepped outside. Chinedu was kneeling in the dirt, talking to a small village boy. The child giggled as Chinedu tossed a small wooden carving into the air and caught it easily. Zainab froze. She had never seen Chinedu smile like that. Not the guarded smile he sometimes gave her, but real joy. When he noticed her watching, his smile faded slightly. I didn't know you could smile like that, she said softly. He rubbed the back of his neck. The boy likes stories. What story? She asked. The child beamed. He told me about a king who pretended to be poor so he could find a wife who loved him for who he was. Zainab's breath caught. She turned slowly toward Chinedu. He met her gaze but said nothing. Something about that story echoed loudly in her chest. Too loudly. That evening, as Zainab returned from the river, she saw a familiar figure standing outside the hut. Her heart sank. Said. Her stepsister stood there, arms crossed, her eyes glittering with mischief. I see you're still here, Said sneered. I thought by now you would have run away from this miserable life. Zainab sighed. What do you want? Said lifted her wrist, letting a gold bracelet catch the fading sunlight. Zainab froze. That bracelet. It was hers, the only thing she had left from her real parents. Where did you get that? Zainab asked, her voice trembling. Said smiled. Mother found it in your things. She said you don't deserve something so beautiful. Rage and pain surged through Zainab's chest. That's mine, she whispered. Said laughed and let the bracelet drop into the mud, grinding it under her heel. Zainab gasped and rushed forward, pushing Saad aside. She knelt and picked up the bracelet, now bent and filthy. Tears filled her eyes. Behind them, a shadow fell. Chinedu stood in the doorway. Get out, he said, his voice low and dangerous. For the first time, Sade looked afraid. She scoffed, but she left. Zainab clutched the ruined bracelet to her chest, her whole body shaking. Chinedu took it gently from her hands. Without a word, he went inside. Moments later, he returned, carefully straightening the metal, cleaning the dirt, restoring what he could. When he handed it back, Zainab could barely speak. In that moment, she knew one thing with certainty. The man she had been forced to marry was nothing like the man the village believed him to be. And whatever secret he was hiding, it would change everything. That night, Zainab could not sleep. She lay on her thin mat, staring up at the wooden roof, watching shadows dance as the oil lamp flickered weakly. The bent gold bracelet rested beside her, wrapped carefully in cloth, just as Chinedu had returned it to her. Every time she closed her eyes, the same questions echoed in her mind. Who was this man she had married? The villagers called him poor, useless, broken. But the man she saw every day was none of those things. She turned slowly and glanced toward the bed. Chinedu lay on his side, facing the wall, his breathing calm and steady. There was nothing in his posture that suggested fear or insecurity. He slept like a man who was certain of who he was. That realization unsettled her more than anything else. Morning came heavy with tension. As Zainab swept the compound, she noticed villagers passing by more often than usual. Some stopped to stare. Others whispered openly now, no longer bothering to hide their suspicion. Something is not right with that man, one elder muttered loudly. No crippled fisherman buys palm wine like that, another replied. I heard he walks differently when he thinks no one is watching. Zainab's grip tightened on the broom. She wanted to shout, to defend him, to tell them to leave him alone. But fear held her back. She knew how quickly whispers turned into accusations and accusations into violence. When she finished her chores, she walked toward the river, hoping the sound of water would quiet her thoughts. Instead, she found Mama Ngozi waiting there. Her heart dropped. Mama Ngozi stood tall, dressed in fine wrappers, her arms heavy with gold bangles. She looked exactly as she always had, proud, cold, untouchable. So Mama Ngozi said, her lips curling in disgust, "This is the life you chose." Zainab swallowed. "What do you want?" Mama Ngozi stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think you are suffering now," she whispered. "This is only the beginning. No one will ever truly love a girl like you." The words struck deep. Mama Ngozi smiled cruelly and walked away, leaving Zainab trembling by the riverbank. She did not see Chinedu standing at a distance, his jaw clenched, his hands curled tightly into fists. That night, as Zainab lay curled in on herself, Chinedu placed a thin blanket over her shoulders. "She was wrong," he said quietly. Zainab did not reply. But for the first time, Mama Ngozi's words did not crush her completely. Days passed and something shifted between Zainab and Chinedu. They spoke more now, soft conversations by the fire, shared silence beneath the stars. Zainab found herself laughing occasionally, surprised by the sound of it. It felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous to feel anything close to happiness. One evening, as they sat outside watching the moon rise, Zainab broke the silence. "Do you ever wish things were different?" she asked. Chinedu turned to her. "Different how? Do you ever wish you had married someone else?" She continued carefully. Someone who deserved you. His jaw tightened. Don't say that. It's true, Zainab whispered. I was thrown away. Given to you like I was nothing. Chinedu reached for her hand, his touch firm and warm. You are not nothing, he said. You are everything. Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not Mama Ngozi, not Sade, not anyone. She looked at him fully, then truly looked at him. The lines of his face, the steadiness in his eyes, the quiet authority he carried without effort. Something did not add up, and Zainab knew she could no longer ignore it. That night, sleep refused to come. Chinedu's words echoed in her mind. You are everything. Why would a poor, broken man speak with such certainty? Why did he never fear hunger the way she did? Why did he never seem ashamed of his life? Why did people instinctively step back when his voice hardened? Before dawn, Zainab made a decision. She would ask him directly. The next morning, as Chinedu mended a basket outside the hut, Zainab approached him slowly. Chinedu, she said. He looked up. Why did you marry me? She asked. He paused, then smiled faintly. Because I wanted to. That's not enough, she said softly. You could have refused. You could have chosen someone else. He studied her for a long moment, then sighed. You think you were the only one who was forced. Her heart skipped. What do you mean? She whispered. Chinedu looked away, his expression guarded. Things are not always what they seem, Zainab. A chill crawled up her spine. Who are you? She asked. He did not answer. Instead, he stood and brushed the dust from his clothes. Follow me. Zainab followed him through winding village paths as the sun dipped low in the sky. They walked in silence, passing places she had never been before. The farther they went, the quieter it became. Finally, they stopped. Zainab's breath caught in her throat. Before them stood a massive iron gate, tall, black, imposing. Beyond it, she could see golden lights flickering through trees, illuminating a vast compound. The air itself felt different, cleaner, heavier with wealth and power. This is not a poor man's home, Zainab whispered. Chinedu stepped forward and pushed the gate open. Inside stood a mansion so grand it looked unreal. Zainab staggered back, her heart pounding violently. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. Chinedu turned to face her. This, he said softly, is my home. Her world shattered. You're poor, she whispered. You said I let people believe that, he replied. Her head spun. No, this can't be true, she breathed. Why, Chinedu sighed. Because I needed to know who truly loved me. Zainab's chest tightened painfully. So all that suffering, she whispered. The hunger, the tears. You let me believe we had nothing. I never meant to hurt you, he said urgently. But you did, she replied, tears streaming down her face. You did. She stepped back. I need time, she whispered. And for the first time since they had married, Zainab turned and walked away from him. Zainab did not know how long she walked. Her feet moved on their own, carrying her away from the iron gates, away from the mansion that still burned behind her eyes like a cruel illusion. The night air felt thick against her skin, heavy with unanswered questions and shattered trust. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the path ahead, but she did not stop. How could he do this? How could the man who held her when she was weak, who fed her when she fainted, who protected her when no one else would, hide something so enormous from her? Her chest tightened painfully. All those nights she had gone to bed hungry, believing they had nothing. All those moments she swallowed her pride, accepting hardship as fate. All those tears she cried into a thin mat, thinking her life was destined for suffering. And all along, he had everything. Zainab pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob as she stumbled down the dark road. The sound of insects filled the night, but it could not drown out the storm raging inside her heart. She felt foolish, tested, used. By the time she realized where her feet had taken her, she was standing in front of Mama Ngozi's house, the place she once called home. Her hands trembled as she raised them to knock. For a brief moment, doubt washed over her. Why was she here? What did she expect to find? Before she could turn away, the door swung open. Said stood there, dressed in fine wrappers, hair shining with oil, gold rings glittering on her fingers. At first, confusion crossed Said's face. Then she noticed the tears streaking Zainab's cheeks, the way her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. A slow, cruel smile spread across her lips. "Well, well," Said said, folding her arms. "Look who came crawling back." Zainab swallowed hard. "I just needed," Sadeh burst into laughter. "Needed what? A reminder that you don't belong here." Zainab's heart pounded painfully. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to breathe. "I never belonged here, did I?" she asked quietly. Said's smile widened. "You're finally learning." Zainab turned to leave, but Said's next words stopped her cold. "I heard about your husband," Said said mockingly. "That poor, limping fisherman you were forced to marry." Anger flared in Zainab's chest. Said did not know the truth. She did not know that the man she mocked lived in a mansion larger than anything she had ever imagined. For a brief moment, Zainab was tempted to tell her everything, to wipe that smug smile off her face. But then she realized something. Said did not deserve the truth. Not yet. Zainab straightened her back and wiped her tears. "You're right," she said calmly. "I was forced to marry him." Said's smirk deepened. "Of course you were. But do you know what?" Sadeh Zainab continued, stepping closer. "For the first time in my life, I was loved." Said's smile faltered. "And I would rather be with a poor man who truly loves me," Zainab said softly, "than stay in a house full of people who never did." Said's face darkened with rage. Zainab turned and walked away, her heart still aching, but her spirit stronger than before. The night was cool when Zainab finally returned to the mansion. She hesitated at the gate, her chest tight with dread. She did not want to see Chinedu. She did not know what she would say if she did. But as she stepped inside, she found him waiting. He stood beneath a tall tree, his posture tense, his eyes filled with worry. "Zainab," he breathed, stepping toward her. "Where did you go?" She looked away. "I needed to think." He nodded slowly. "And what did you decide?" Her throat tightened. "I don't know." Chinedu ran a hand through his hair, pain flashing across his face. "I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to find someone who loved me for who I was." Zainab turned sharply. "And what about me?" she asked. "Did you ever think about how I felt, about what it meant to believe I was trapped in a life of suffering, when all along it was just a test?" His shoulders sagged. "I did," he said quietly. "Every day. And every time I saw you struggle, I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid you would leave." Tears welled in her eyes. She hated him in that moment. And yet, she loved him too. That was the cruelest part. "Please," Chinedu whispered, taking her hands gently. "Don't leave me." Zainab closed her eyes. Could she walk away from the only person who had ever truly cared for her? Or could she forgive a lie that had reopened every wound she carried? She did not answer. While Zainab wrestled with her heart, the village buzzed with rumors. Mama Ngozi sat outside her house peeling cassava when she overheard two women whispering nearby. "Did you hear?" one said. "Hear what the other asked?" "That man Zainab married, he's not poor." Mama Ngozi's hands froze. "What do you mean?" the second woman asked. "He's a billionaire," the first replied. "Mansions, businesses, lands, everything." The cassava knife slipped from Mama Ngozi's fingers. A billionaire. Her heart began to race. All this time. The man she had mocked, the man she had thrown Zainab to like punishment, was richer than anyone in the village. Richer than she could ever imagine. Rage boiled in her chest. Why wasn't it Saad? Why had the unwanted girl been chosen instead? That night, Mama Ngozi gathered those who shared her bitterness. Men and women who could not stand to see someone they despised rise above them. We cannot allow that girl to live in wealth while we suffer, Mama Ngozi hissed. She does not belong there. A murmur of agreement filled the room. Tomorrow, she continued, her eyes gleaming. We go to that mansion. The next evening, as the sun dipped low, a group of villagers marched toward the mansion with sticks and stones in their hands. Mama Ngozi led them, her face twisted with fury. At the gates, she screamed, Zainab. Come out inside. Zainab's heart clenched when she heard the voice she had feared her whole life. Chinedu stood immediately. Stay here, he said firmly. Zainab shook her head. No, I need to face her. Together they stepped outside. When Mama Ngozi saw Zainab standing there dressed in fine clothes, her skin glowing with health and strength, her anger exploded. You ungrateful girl, she spat. You stole what should have been Sade's before Zainab could respond. Chinedu stepped forward. Enough, he thundered. The crowd fell silent. This was not the weak fisherman they remembered. This is my home, Chinedu continued coldly, and that is my wife. Anyone who comes here to threaten her will answer to me. The villagers shifted uneasily. Mama Ngozi's face went pale. She had lost. As the crowd retreated in shame, Zainab felt tears spill down her cheeks. Chinedu turned to her, his gaze steady. I will always defend you. In that moment, Zainab knew one thing for certain. Her life had changed forever. That night, silence returned to the mansion, but it was not peaceful. Zainab stood alone by the tall window, staring out into the darkness where the villagers had once gathered with stones and hatred. The echo of Mama Ngozi's voice still rang in her ears, sharp and poisonous. Her heart felt heavy, weighed down by memories she had tried so hard to bury. Behind her, Chinedu moved quietly, unsure of how close to stand, unsure of what she needed now. You didn't deserve that, he said softly. Zainab did not turn around. I've lived with her voice in my head my whole life, she replied. Tonight just reminded me. Chinedu fell silent. He had defended her with strength and authority, yet he knew some wounds could not be shielded away by power alone. Across the village, Mama Ngozi lay awake on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. Her heart pounded violently in her chest, each beat filled with regret she refused to name. Everything had gone wrong. She had marched to that mansion expecting to humiliate Zainab, to drag her back down into the dust where she believed the girl belonged. Instead, she had been the one exposed, small, powerless, and ashamed before the entire village. A billionaire. That word echoed in her mind like a curse. The man she had mocked. The man she had used to punish Zainab. The man she believed was nothing. He had been everything. Her hands shook as she remembered Zainab standing tall beside him, glowing with confidence she had never allowed the girl to have under her roof. For the first time in years, Mama Ngozi felt fear, not of poverty, not of hunger, but of the truth. She had been wrong. Said, on the other hand, was furious. She paced their small room like a trapped animal, gold bracelets clinking angrily against her wrists. This is your fault, she snapped at her mother. If you hadn't forced her to marry that man, it could have been me. Mama Ngozi looked at her daughter slowly. For the first time, she truly saw what she had raised. Greed burned in Sade's eyes, not love, not concern, just envy. Mama Ngozi felt something crack inside her chest. She had spent years justifying her cruelty by telling herself she was protecting her real child. But now, standing before Sade's bitterness, she wondered who she had really been protecting at all. Back at the mansion, Zainab sat on the edge of a wide bed she still felt unworthy to sleep in. The luxury around her felt unreal: soft sheets, polished floors, quiet comfort. It was everything she had been told she would never have. Yet her heart remained restless. "Why do I still feel empty?" she whispered. Chinedu sat beside her, careful not to touch her without permission. "Because wealth doesn't erase pain," he said gently. "And neither does revenge." She turned to him slowly. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I just don't want to carry this hatred anymore." His eyes softened. The next morning, Zainab woke early, long before the sun fully rose. She dressed simply and walked into the garden, letting the cool air fill her lungs. The memory of Mama Ngozi's face, twisted with rage, then fear, played over and over in her mind. For years she had dreamed of this moment, of standing above the woman who broke her, of watching her suffer the same humiliation. Yet when the moment came, it brought no peace, only exhaustion. Zainab returned to her room and sat at a small desk by the window. Slowly, with trembling hands, she picked up a piece of paper. She stared at it for a long time. Then she began to write. "Mama Ngozi, I know you never loved me. I know you never wanted me. I grew up believing I had to earn the right to exist in your home. I worked until my body ached. I swallowed insults I did not deserve. I begged God every night to make you see me as your daughter. You never did. But despite everything, I do not hate you. I have a new life now, a life filled with care, respect, and love. Chinedu is a good man. He protects me. He listens to me. He treats me as though my life has value. I lack nothing. I wish things had been different between us. I wish you had chosen kindness instead of cruelty, but I refuse to let the past chain me any longer. I forgive you." Zainab. When she finished, tears blurred the words on the page. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It did not mean excusing. It meant choosing freedom. Chinedu found her holding the letter, her shoulders shaking quietly. "You don't have to send it," he said carefully. "Not if it hurts too much." Zainab wiped her eyes and shook her head. "I need to," she said. "For myself." The letter reached Mama Ngozi 2 days later. She stared at the envelope, recognizing Zainab's handwriting immediately. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her heart pounding with fear and curiosity. As she read, tears slipped down her cheeks, slow at first, then uncontrollably. Zainab had forgiven her. After everything she had done, she had been forgiven. Mama Ngozi pressed the letter to her chest, her body shaking with sobs. She had denied herself for years. She had not only lost Zainab, she had lost the chance to be a mother. And now, faced with mercy she did not deserve, the weight of her sins finally crushed her pride. At the mansion, life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. Zainab and Chinedu spent more time together, walking through the gardens, sharing quiet meals, learning who they were without fear hovering over them. Yet there remained an unspoken distance between them. The truth still stood between them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Zainab stopped walking and turned to him. "I'm not angry the way I was before," she said, "but I'm still hurt." Chinedu nodded. "I know. You tested my love," she continued softly. "When all my life I had been tested by suffering already." Pain flashed in his eyes. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I thought hiding my wealth would protect me. I didn't realize it would reopen your wounds." She studied his face. "I don't know if I can fully forgive you yet," she said honestly. "I will wait," he replied without hesitation. "As long as it takes." That was the first time she smiled at him since the truth came out. That night, as Zainab lay in a warm bed under a solid roof, she realized something profound. She was no longer the abandoned child begging to be chosen. She was a woman learning to choose herself, and though her journey was not over, she had taken the hardest step of all, letting go of hatred even when it felt justified. The dawn ahead promised change, not just for her, but for everyone who once believed she was nothing. The village did not forget what had happened at the mansion. People talked about it in low voices at the market, beside cooking fires, and along the riverbanks. The story spread quickly how Mama Ngozi had led a crowd in anger, how she had shouted curses at the girl she once raised, and how she had been silenced by a man she thought was nothing. For the first time in her life, Mama Ngozi became the subject of whispers. Not the powerful woman, not the respected elder, but the woman who threw away a blessing. She felt it everywhere she went. Women who once laughed beside her now avoided her gaze. Men who once nodded in respect now looked away. Even the elders who used to greet her warmly spoke to her with polite distance. At night she sat alone, the house eerily quiet. Sade no longer spoke to her with affection. Instead, she sulked in corners, blaming everyone but herself. Mama Ngozi had lost control of everything she thought she owned. Meanwhile, Zainab's life began to change in quieter, deeper ways. She still felt out of place in the mansion. Each morning she woke up expecting to be shouted at, expecting to be told she did not belong. Old habits were hard to break. But Chinedu noticed. He never forced her into luxury. He never mocked her hesitation. Instead, he allowed her to grow into the space slowly, gently. "You don't have to impress anyone here," he told her one morning as she tried to scrub a spotless floor. "You are already enough." The words stayed with her. Zainab began to explore the mansion on her own terms. She walked through the long corridors, touching the walls, as if to confirm they were real. She stood in the library, running her fingers over books she had never imagined she would see. She wandered into the kitchen and learned that food could exist without fear of running out. Yet she did not forget who she was. She asked the staff their names. She thanked them. She listened to their stories. Some of them stared at her in disbelief. They had expected arrogance. They had expected distance. Instead, they found humility. "She carries herself like someone who knows pain," one maid whispered to another. "That kind of woman never looks down on others." Chinedu watched her closely. He saw the way she spoke gently to everyone, the way she flinched at raised voices, the way she paused before sitting in expensive chairs as if asking permission from an invisible authority. One evening he finally said it aloud. "You still don't believe this life is yours, do you?" Zainab hesitated. Then she shook her head. "All my life I was taught that good things don't last for people like me." Chinedu's chest tightened. "I wanted to protect myself," he said quietly. "I didn't realize I was teaching you the same fear." She met his eyes. "I know why you did it," she said, "but knowing doesn't erase the hurt." He nodded. "I understand." For the first time there was no argument, no defense, just truth. Back in the village, Mama Ngozi could no longer ignore her reality. One afternoon she walked to the river and sat where Zainab used to wash clothes. The memory struck her like a blow, the girl bending over buckets, her back aching, never once complaining. Mama Ngozi's throat tightened. "She never fought me," she whispered to herself, "not once." The realization hurt more than any insult. Days later she fell ill. At first she dismissed it as fatigue, but the weakness grew worse. Her body ached, her appetite vanished, and she spent long hours staring at the ceiling, trapped with her thoughts. Said did little to help. "Why should I suffer because of her?" Said complained one night. "You're the one who chose her." Mama Ngozi turned away, tears slipping silently into her pillow. In her sickness, clarity came too late. The letter Zainab had written became Mama Ngozi's anchor. She read it over and over, tracing the words with trembling fingers. "I forgive you. Forgiveness, something she had never offered freely, had now been given to her without demand. It broke her. At the mansion, Zainab began to find her voice. One afternoon she approached Chinedu with a hesitant expression. "There are women in the village," she said softly. "Women like me. Girls who work themselves to the bone and believe it's all they deserve." Chinedu listened carefully. "I want to help them," Zainab continued, "not with pity, with opportunity." His eyes softened with pride. "Then we will," he said, "together." That was the moment Zainab realized something profound. She was no longer surviving, she was becoming. As weeks passed, Zainab accompanied Chinedu to meetings. At first she stayed quiet, observing from the side. But gradually she began to speak carefully, thoughtfully. People noticed. She spoke not from theory, but from lived experience. She understood hardship, hunger, and humiliation in ways no book could teach. "She sees people," one manager said after a meeting, "not numbers." Chinedu watched her with admiration. He no longer tried to hide. One evening, as they stood on the balcony watching the sun dip below the horizon, Chinedu spoke quietly. "You've changed this place." Zainab smiled faintly. "It's changing me too." He turned to her, his voice steady. "I know I broke your trust. I won't ask you to forget that." She met his gaze. "But I want you to know this," he continued. "Every day I choose you, not as a test, not as an experiment, as my partner." Zainab's heart beat faster. She did not respond immediately, but this time when she reached for his hand, she did not pull away. In the village, Mama Ngozi lay weak on her bed, staring at the door. For the first time in her life, she whispered a prayer, not for wealth, not for power, but for forgiveness she already received. And miles away, Zainab stood taller than she ever had before, not because of riches, but because she had survived cruelty without becoming cruel herself. The path ahead was still long, but she was finally walking it by choice. The day Mama Ngozi collapsed, the village shook with rumors. Some said it was sickness brought by old age. Others whispered it was a curse, punishment for cruelty finally returning to its source. By midday, word had spread beyond the village paths and muddy compounds. It reached the ears of people who once watched Zainab scrub floors and carry buckets until her hands bled. It reached the market women, the elders, the children who used to point and laugh. And eventually it reached Zainab. She was standing beside a wide window in the mansion when one of the household staff approached her quietly. "Madam," the woman said gently, "a message came from the village. Mama Ngozi is very sick." The word settled heavily in Zainab's chest. For a long moment she said nothing. Chinedu, who had been speaking with someone nearby, noticed the change in her expression. He dismissed the others and walked toward her. "What is it?" he asked. She swallowed. "Mama Ngozi, she's ill." He studied her face carefully. "Do you want to go?" Zainab hesitated. Memories surged forward, harsh words. Cold looks, nights of hunger, the day she was pushed out without mercy. She remembered kneeling in the dark, begging for love that never came. And yet, she also remembered the letter she had written. "I forgive you." Forgiveness spoken in ink was one thing. Facing the person was another. "I don't know," she admitted. Chinedu nodded. "Whatever you decide, I will support you." That night, Zainab barely slept. She lay awake listening to the quiet hum of the mansion, so different from the restless nights in the hut by the river. Her heart wrestled with itself. Was forgiveness meant to stay distant? Or did it require presence, painful, vulnerable presence? Just before dawn, she made her decision. The village looked smaller than she remembered. As the car approached, people stopped what they were doing to stare. Some whispered her name, others bowed their heads awkwardly. The same paths that once felt endless now seemed narrow and fragile. Zainab stepped out of the car slowly. She wore no expensive jewelry, no dramatic display of wealth, just a simple dress and calm dignity. When she reached Mama Ngozi's house, she paused at the doorway. The air inside smelled of herbs and sickness. Mama Ngozi lay on the mat thinner than Zainab had ever seen her. Her once sharp eyes were dull, her voice barely above a whisper. When she saw Zainab, her breath caught. "You came," Mama Ngozi whispered, disbelief and shame mingling in her tone. Zainab nodded. "I heard you were sick." Silence stretched between them, thick with years of unspoken pain. Mama Ngozi turned her face away, tears slipping down her temples. "I don't deserve this," she murmured. "Your kindness, your forgiveness." Zainab stepped closer. "I didn't forgive you because you deserved it," she said softly. "I forgave you because I needed peace." Mama Ngozi sobbed. "I was cruel to you," she said. "I knew it. And I still chose it. Every day." Zainab's chest tightened, but she did not look away. "I can't change what happened," Mama Ngozi continued, "but if I could take it back, you can't," Zainab interrupted gently. "But you can tell the truth now." Mama Ngozi looked at her in confusion. "Tell them," Zainab said. "Tell the village who I was to you and what you did." Mama Ngozi closed her eyes, trembling. "I will," she whispered. "I swear." Outside, Sade listened from the doorway, her face twisted with resentment. She had expected Zainab to come back triumphant, to mock, to humiliate, to remind them all of what they lost. Instead, she saw mercy. And it enraged her. "You think forgiveness makes you better than us," Sade snapped as Zainab stepped outside. "You think playing the saint will change the past?" Zainab turned calmly. "I'm not better than you," she said. "I just chose not to become you." The words struck harder than any insult. Sade scoffed, but her voice wavered. "Enjoy your riches while you can." Zainab did not respond. She had nothing left to prove. Back at the mansion, something shifted permanently. Zainab felt lighter, not because the past had vanished, but because it no longer ruled her. She had faced the source of her pain and walked away without hatred clinging to her heels. Chinedu noticed the change immediately. "You look freer," he said that evening. "I am," she replied, for the first time. He smiled, relief evident in his eyes. Days later, Mama Ngozi gathered the elders. Her voice was weak, but her words were clear. "I lied to you all," she confessed. "I took in a child and punished her for existing. I treated her worse than a stranger." The village listened in stunned silence. "She did nothing wrong," Mama Ngozi continued. "Any blessing she has now, she earned it through suffering I caused." Whispers rippled through the crowd, not of mockery but of shame. For the first time, the village confronted its own cruelty. At the mansion, Chinedu invited Zainab to walk with him through the garden as the sun dipped low. "There's something I want to ask you," he said. She looked at him, curious. "After everything," he continued, "after the lies, the pain, do you still see a future with me?" Zainab stopped walking. She looked at him carefully. Not as the poor fisherman, not as the billionaire, but as the man who had fed her when she was starving, defended her when she was hunted, and waited when she asked for time. "I do," she said slowly. "But not as a continuation of what we were forced into." He nodded. "I want the same." She met his gaze. "Then we start again, by choice." Hope flickered between them. That night, as Zainab stood by the window watching the moon rise, she realized something profound. The girl who once begged to be loved had become a woman who chose how love would enter her life. The past had come knocking one last time, and she had answered not with fear but with strength. The village seemed quieter after Mama Ngozi's confession. Not peaceful, just subdued, like a place forced to look at itself in the mirror for the first time. People spoke more softly. Laughter, when it came, felt cautious. Shame had a way of changing the air, and everyone could feel it. Zainab returned to the mansion carrying that heaviness with her. She had done what she came to do. She had faced her past. She had spoken truth where lies once lived. Yet instead of relief, she felt something else rising inside her: fear. Because now that the past had loosened its grip, the future demanded an answer. Chinedu noticed her distance immediately. She still walked beside him, still listened, still spoke gently. But something in her eyes remained guarded, as though part of her stood at a doorway she had not yet decided to cross. One evening, as they sat beneath the large mango tree in the garden, Chinedu finally broke the silence. "You're thinking about leaving," he said quietly. Zainab looked up, startled. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to," he replied. "I can feel it." She lowered her gaze, fingers twisting together in her lap. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of what he asked." She inhaled deeply. "Of choosing wrong again." Chinedu nodded slowly. "That fear doesn't make you weak. It means you've survived." She looked at him, then truly looked at the man who had lived as a shadow to protect his heart, and at the woman who had lived as a shadow because she believed she was nothing. "We were both hiding," she said softly. "Yes," he agreed, "but hiding doesn't build a future." The next few days tested them in ways neither expected. News of Chinedu's identity spread beyond the village. Business associates arrived unannounced. Distant relatives appeared suddenly, full of smiles and forgotten affection. Women from neighboring towns found excuses to visit, their intentions barely disguised. Zainab watched it all quietly. She told herself she should not care. After all, this was the world. Chinedu belonged to a world of wealth, attention, and choice. But the old fear stirred. Why would he choose me when he could choose anyone? One afternoon, she overheard two women speaking near the entrance of the mansion. "She's lucky," one said. "But luck runs out." "Yes," the other replied. "Men like him don't stay with women who remind them of poverty." The words pierced deeper than Zainab expected. That night, she could not sleep. She sat alone on the balcony, staring at the stars, wondering if she was still the abandoned girl, pretending to belong in a place that would one day reject her. Chinedu found her there just before midnight. "You should be resting," he said gently. "I can't," she replied. He joined her, leaning against the railing. For a while, they said nothing. Then Zainab spoke. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Living as someone else?" He considered her question carefully. "I regret the pain it caused you," he said honestly. "But I don't regret meeting you the way I did," she swallowed. "If I had known who you were from the beginning, I might have never trusted you." "That's why I hid," he said, "and that's why I was wrong." She turned to him. "What happens when the world decides I'm not enough for you?" Chinedu faced her fully. "The world doesn't get to decide that." She shook her head. "It always has." He reached for her hand but stopped himself, giving her space. "Zainab," he said, his voice steady, "I don't want you to stay with me out of fear of being alone. I want you to choose me because you want to." Tears filled her eyes. "That's the hardest part," she whispered. "I've never been allowed to choose." The following morning, Zainab did something unexpected. She asked to visit the hut by the river. Chinedu hesitated but agreed. They stood together before the small broken structure where their lives had once collided in pain and quiet kindness. The roof still sagged, the walls still bore cracks, but the place felt strangely sacred now. "This is where I learned what love felt like," Zainab said softly. Chinedu looked at her in surprise. "Not the grand gestures," she continued, "but the small ones. Giving me food when you had none, covering me when I was cold, defending me when I had no voice." She turned to him. "That man, that version of you, he was real." He nodded. "He still is." She stepped inside the hut alone for a moment, then returned with the thin mat she once slept on. "I need to know something," she said. "If everything disappeared tomorrow, the money, the mansion, the power, would you still choose me?" Without hesitation, Chinedu answered yes. "And if I walked away?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "I would let you," he said, "even if it broke me." Zainab's chest tightened. That was the answer she needed. Still, one final test awaited. Said arrived at the mansion uninvited 2 days later. She stood at the gate dressed elegantly, her expression carefully composed. Zainab met her alone. "I came to see for myself," Said said coolly. "The life you stole." Zainab met her gaze. "I stole nothing." Said scoffed. "Do you think you belong here among people like him?" "I belong wherever I choose to stand," Zainab replied calmly. Said's eyes flickered with something like doubt. "You were always weak," she said finally. "Forgiveness won't change that." Zainab smiled softly. "Forgiveness is not weakness. It's the strength you never learned." Said had no reply. She left without another word. That evening, Zainab found Chinedu waiting for her in the garden. "I've made my decision," she said. He held his breath. "I'm staying," she continued. "Not because of what you have, but because of who you are when no one is watching." Relief flooded his face. But she added, "This time we do things right." He nodded. "Name it." "I want a real choice," she said. "A real proposal. A real beginning." Chinedu smiled a smile full of hope, not secrecy. "Then that's exactly what you'll have." As the night wrapped around them, Zainab realized something powerful. Love had tested her again and again through hunger, humiliation, lies, and fear. And this time she was not choosing from desperation. She was choosing from strength. The morning Zainab woke to birdsong instead of fear, she knew something inside her had changed. Not overnight, not magically, but steadily, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. She stood by the window of the mansion watching the sun rise over the trees, and for the first time she did not feel like a visitor in someone else's life. She felt present, awake, grounded. Still, she remembered her words from the night before. A real choice, a real proposal, a real beginning. If Chinedu truly meant what he said, she would see it not in promises but in actions. Chinedu did not rush her. That alone surprised her. In the days that followed, he treated her not as a fragile heart to be handled carefully, nor as a prize to be claimed, but as a partner whose pace mattered. He included her in decisions, not just business meetings, but small, everyday choices. "What do you think? Would you be comfortable with this? Tell me if this feels like too much." Each question chipped away at the fear Zainab had carried for so long, the fear that her voice did not matter. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden, Chinedu stopped suddenly. "I want to show you something," he said. Zainab hesitated, then nodded. They drove past the village, past familiar roads, until the scenery changed. The land opened into a wide clearing where workers were busy building something new. Zainab stared in confusion. "What is this place?" she asked. Chinedu stepped out of the car. "Come and see." As they approached, Zainab saw it, a modest building taking shape, not grand or extravagant, but solid, purposeful. "This will be a center," Chinedu explained. "For women, for girls." Zainab turned to him slowly. "What kind of center?" "A place for skills training," he said. "Education, small loans, support, a place where no one is treated as disposable." Her breath caught. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you asked to help women like you," he replied simply. "And because I believe you understand their needs better than anyone." Tears filled her eyes, not of pain but of recognition. He had listened. Word spread quickly. Women from nearby villages came to look at the building site. Some came out of curiosity, others out of hope they were afraid to name. Zainab walked among them quietly, answering questions, listening to stories. She did not speak like someone above them. She spoke like someone who had stood exactly where they stood. "I know what it's like," she told one young girl softly. "To believe you don't deserve better?" The girl stared at her in disbelief. Zainab smiled. "You do." Chinedu watched from a distance, his chest swelling with something close to awe. This was the woman he loved, not because of her past, but because of how she turned pain into purpose. Meanwhile, back in the village, Mama Ngozi's condition worsened. The elders visited, neighbors whispered. Said stayed away more often than not, ashamed and resentful. One evening, Mama Ngozi asked for water and struggled to lift the cup. Her hands trembled. "I was wrong," she whispered to the empty room, "about everything." She thought of Zainab, quiet, obedient, never fighting back. She had mistaken silence for weakness. Now she knew better. At the mansion, Chinedu prepared quietly. No announcements, no public spectacle. Zainab noticed the shift in his energy, the focus, the careful planning, but she did not ask questions. She trusted him now enough to wait. Then one evening he asked her to walk with him. They went to the garden just as the sky softened into gold. The air was cool, peaceful. They stopped beneath a tall tree, the same one where he had once waited for her, afraid she would never return. "Zainab," he said. She turned to him. "I asked you to choose," he continued, "because I didn't want you to stay out of fear. Today I want to choose you openly, honestly, and without conditions." He reached into his pocket and took out a small box. Not extravagant, not loud, just intentional. Zainab's heart pounded. "I know our marriage began without your consent," he said, his voice steady. "I know I hid the truth and hurt you. I can't erase that. But I can stand here now and ask you properly." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" he asked, this time by choice. Zainab covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. She thought of the girl forced out of a house with no dress, no blessing, no voice. She thought of the woman standing here now, heard, respected, seen. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Chinedu exhaled shakily and slipped the ring onto her finger. Applause did not follow. Cameras did not flash, but something far more powerful settled into the moment. Peace. The news reached the village within days. Some rejoiced, others scoffed. A few felt the sting of regret too deep to speak aloud. Sade heard it and said nothing. Mama Ngozi heard it and cried. She pressed Zainab's old letter to her chest, whispering a prayer she had never learned how to say properly before. "Thank you for being better than me." Zainab returned to the hut by the river one last time. She stood inside, touching the cracked walls, the old mat now folded neatly. It no longer hurt to remember. This place had not been her prison. It had been her classroom. She stepped outside, closed her eyes, and breathed deeply. Then she walked away without looking back. That night, as she lay beside Chinedu, not in fear, not in obligation, but in peace, Zainab understood something that changed everything. Love did not rescue her. She rescued herself. Love simply walked beside her once she did. The days that followed the proposal were filled with a quiet kind of transformation. Not the loud celebratory change the village expected, but the deeper kind that settles into the bones and reshapes a life from the inside out. Zainab woke each morning no longer weighed down by the question of whether she belonged. The ring on her finger was not a symbol of wealth or rescue. It was proof of choice, hers and his. Still, the past was not finished with her yet, because when healing begins, truth demands its final reckoning. Mama Ngozi knew her time was running out. Her body had grown weaker, but her mind, once sharp with cruelty, had turned inward, heavy with regret. One evening she asked the village elders to gather once more. This time her voice did not carry authority, only honesty. "I took in a child," she began, her breath shallow, "and I punished her for my own bitterness. I let jealousy guide me. I let fear make me cruel. The elders listened in silence. I used marriage as a weapon, she continued, her voice breaking. I threw Zainab away, not knowing I was throwing away my own humanity. Some of the elders bowed their heads, others wiped their eyes. The village had played its part too, mocking, whispering, laughing when a girl was pushed into suffering. Mama Ngozi lifted her gaze weakly. If there is any lesson left in me, she said, let it be this: do not mistake silence for weakness, and do not believe kindness is something you can crush without consequence. Her confession traveled faster than any rumor ever had. For the first time, the village spoke Zainab's name with respect. Zainab heard about the confession 2 days later. She stood quietly as the words were repeated to her, her face calm, her heart steady. The girl who once trembled at Mama Ngozi's voice was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood something deeply important. Justice did not always come with revenge. Sometimes it came with truth. Meanwhile, preparations for the new wedding moved forward, not hurried, not forced. Zainab insisted on simplicity. I don't need to prove anything, she told Chinedu gently. I want this day to feel like us. And so the celebration was planned under open skies with people who had earned the right to witness their joy. Women from the villages helped with decorations. The same hands that once pointed now tied ribbons and arranged flowers. There was no bitterness in Zainab's eyes as she welcomed them. Only grace. Said watched from a distance. She had come uninvited, standing at the edge of the gathering, her expression unreadable. Gone was the smugness. Gone was the certainty that she deserved more. For the first time, Sade felt small, not because Zainab had risen, but because she herself had never learned how. Zainab noticed her. She did not approach. She did not gloat. She simply continued smiling, laughing, living. And that was Sade's punishment. The night before the wedding, Chinedu found Zainab standing alone in the garden. Are you nervous? He asked. She smiled softly. No, I'm at peace. He studied her face. You've forgiven a lot. I didn't forgive because they asked, she replied. I forgave because I didn't want my future held hostage by my past. He nodded, understanding more deeply than ever why he loved her. The wedding day arrived quietly, like a blessing that did not need announcement. Zainab wore a simple dress, elegant but unburdened. No weight of expectation pressed on her shoulders. She walked forward not as someone being given away, but as someone stepping forward by choice. When she reached Chinedu, he took her hands gently, reverently. This time, there was no secrecy, no test, only truth. As they exchanged vows, Zainab's voice did not shake. I choose you, she said clearly. Not because you saved me, but because you saw me. Chinedu swallowed hard. And I choose you, he replied, not because you endured, but because you became. The applause that followed was soft, sincere, earned. Far away in a quiet house at the edge of the village, Mama Ngozi listened to the distant sound of celebration carried by the wind. She closed her eyes. Zainab had not come, and she did not expect her to. Still, peace settled into her chest as she whispered one final truth to the silence. She was always better than me. That night, Mama Ngozi slept and did not wake again. The village mourned quietly, not just for a woman who died, but for the mother she never chose to be. When the news reached Zainab, she did not collapse. She did not rejoice. She stood silently, holding Chinedu's hand, and bowed her head. She gave me life, Zainab said softly, and she taught me who I never want to become. That was all. Weeks passed. The Center for Women opened its doors. Girls learned skills. Mothers learned confidence. Stories changed. And often when someone asked Zainab how she survived such cruelty, she answered simply, I stopped waiting to be chosen. One evening, as Zainab and Chinedu sat together watching the sun dip below the horizon, she rested her head on his shoulder. I used to think my life was decided the day I was thrown away, she said. Chinedu kissed her temple. But that was the day you began. She smiled. The past was finally silent, and the future unwritten, open, honest belonged to her. The morning after the wedding, Zainab woke before the sun. She lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet rhythm of a life that no longer felt borrowed. The mansion around her was silent but not empty. It carried warmth now, voices, laughter, purpose. She turned her head and watched Chinedu sleeping beside her, his face peaceful, unguarded. For the first time in her life, Zainab felt something she had never known how to name before. Belonging. Not because someone allowed it, but because she chose it. The village continued to change. It did not happen all at once. Transformation rarely does. But it came in small, undeniable ways. Women standing taller at the market, girls speaking with confidence instead of fear. Men learning that power without compassion was hollow. The center Zainab and Chinedu built became a place of quiet miracles. A young widow learned tailoring and opened her own stall. A teenage girl who had been pulled from school learned bookkeeping and returned to her studies. Mothers who once believed suffering was their destiny learned that dignity could be taught and claimed. Zainab walked among them not as a savior but as a witness. "I was where you are," she would say. "And I promise you this is not the end of your story." They believed her because she was living proof. Chinedu watched her grow into this role with a mixture of pride and humility. He had built businesses, negotiated deals, controlled wealth. But none of those achievements compared to watching Zainab stand before a room of women and speak life into them. One afternoon as they drove back from the center, he said quietly, "You know, you don't need my name to do this." Zainab smiled softly. "I never did." He laughed, understanding the truth behind her words. Zaid faded from the center of the story. She married eventually, not into wealth, not into misery, but into a life that forced her to confront herself. There were no grand punishments, no dramatic downfall. Just the quiet consequence of becoming the person you choose to be. Sometimes that was justice enough. One evening, Zainab returned alone to the riverbank. The water moved gently, just as it always had. She stood where she once knelt with buckets heavier than her heart, remembering the girl who believed her silence was survival. She took a deep breath. "Thank you," she whispered, not to the river, not to the past, but to herself. She had endured without losing her humanity. She had forgiven without surrendering her worth. She had loved without erasing herself. That was her victory. Back at the mansion, Chinedu waited for her beneath the old mango tree. "I was wondering where you went," he said. She smiled and took his hand. "I needed to say goodbye." "To what?" "To the girl who thought pain was all she deserved." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm glad she stayed long enough to become me." As the months passed, Zainab learned that healing was not a destination, it was a practice. There were days old fears resurfaced, days she flinched at raised voices, days she questioned whether she was truly worthy of all she had built. But those days no longer controlled her, because now she knew something powerful. Worth is not granted by families, villages, or marriages, it is claimed. One night, sitting beside Chinedu under a sky full of stars, Zainab spoke softly. "If I ever have a daughter," she said, "I will never teach her to earn love by suffering." Chinedu nodded. "She will learn love by being seen." Zainab rested her head on his shoulder, smiling. Years later, people would tell Zainab's story differently. Some would focus on the billionaire who hid his identity. Others would focus on the cruel family that lost everything. But Zainab knew the truth. The story was never about wealth. It was about a girl who was thrown away and chose not to throw herself away with them. And so her life continued. Not perfect, not painless, but honest, chosen, free. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying laughter from the center, the sound of women learning, building, living. Zainab closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She was no longer surviving. She was home. Zainab's story is not just a tale about poverty and wealth. It is a mirror held up to our own lives. It reminds us that the deepest wounds are not caused by hunger, torn clothes, or empty rooms, but by being made to feel unwanted, by being told again and again that our existence is a burden. And yet this story also teaches us something powerful. What breaks you does not have to define you. Zainab was abandoned, humiliated, and used as a tool of punishment. She was given away without choice, without dignity. But the turning point of her life did not come when she entered a mansion. It came when she realized this truth: her worth was never something others could decide. True love did not save Zainab. Wealth did not heal her. Revenge did not free her. What freed her was courage. The courage to forgive without forgetting, to love without erasing herself, and to choose a future that did not look like her past. This story is for anyone who has ever felt invisible, for anyone who was told to accept suffering as destiny, for anyone who believes it might be too late to start again. It is not. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. And your story is still being written. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. Tell us what part of Zainab's journey spoke to you the most. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories of justice, healing, and quiet strength, subscribe to the channel and walk this journey with us. Your presence here means more than you know.